Welcome to Green Home NYC's September Forum titled Sustainable Food Systems in NYC, Policy, Compost, and Private Sector Engagement. We have a phenomenal lineup of experts in the food space tonight. I'd just like to introduce Green Home NYC before we get into this night's agenda. My name is Noah. I am a Green Home NYC volunteer. We are a 100% volunteer-run 501c3 nonprofit organization. Founded in 2002, our mission has been to promote an energy efficient and sustainable built environment and to support green professional development in New York City. There are three core components of what Green Home NYC does. The first, you're here tonight, we're doing a monthly forum. We cover a range of topics throughout the year, from food systems to ag to solar energy and renewables, sustainable fashion, and of course, building and energy efficiency. We also have a Green Careers group that does various resume building workshops, and we have a tours group where we do tours of places like green roofs and biodigester facilities and other sorts of sustainably oriented activities that are happening in and around New York City. I love volunteering for Green Home for a key reason, because you make it your own. I was always fascinated with renewable energy. I've been working renewable energy and also like sustainable food. So those are the two topics that I like to help out with throughout the year. If something in this realm of sustainability interests you and you're looking for volunteer opportunities, please talk to one of the volunteers. Raise your hand if you are a Green Home NYC volunteer here tonight. All right, nice. We've got several. So yeah, feel free to reach out to anyone and learn more about how you might want to get involved. And yeah, stay in touch about other events that we have coming down the pike. So for tonight, I'll let the speakers speak to their own experience, but Tia, Andrew, and Needy have a really breadth of experience in the food and sustainability space. Tia and Needy both happen to work together at the Mayor's Office for Food Policy. Andrew has been, I think, now a decade now at DSNY. So and now Tia and Needy are doing even more interesting and really amazing things in the food space at C40, and Needy will tell us more about her environmental scientist passion. So let's kick it off with Tia from C40.
Thanks. I'm Tia Schwab. I am the Senior Manager of U.S. Food Systems at C40, and I'll give a little overview about C40 Cities as an organization. In the past, I worked at the New York City Mayor's Office of Food Policy alongside Nikki, and I've also worked in the nutrition security space in DC, as well as in food journalism. So all of that is kind of informing my perspective today. Like I said, I'll give a little overview of C40 as an organization and how they've worked with New York City, and also give a few examples from around the world, but really let our two other speakers dive into specifics. And if you have any questions, just feel free to raise your hand as I go. But at large, C40 is a network of mayors from around the world. So we have nearly 100 cities represented and they're all collaborating on climate action. And C40 uses this approach of working through cities because cities consume around 75% of the world's energy and create over 70% of energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. It's also where increasingly the bulk of our population globally lives and where the bulk of our world's GDP is generated. So just a high concentration of opportunity and challenges here. So like I said, the network is nearly 100 cities and represents 23% of the global economy. Just a graph of our representation across the world. And in terms of what we do, we work with the mayors and their teams, including at departments like DSNY, to raise climate ambition, create climate action plans, build a movement across the world, scaling up climate action through things like best practices. So really connecting cities to learn from each other, and we like to say like de-risking innovation, so that if one city has tried something and it didn't work, or it did work in this specific way, other cities can work on that too. We also, as an org, facilitate access to finance. That's primarily our approach for global South cities, less so global North cities. But this is just an overview of what C40 does at large. And we work across a bunch of different initiatives in environment and sustainability. So today I'm only talking about food systems, but I know there's a lot of you in the room who come from different backgrounds, so I definitely encourage you to check out our programming in other areas. We have a really amazing team across the world working on these issues. In terms of food systems at large, we work with the cities in our network to create a healthier, more sustainable, and more just food system. So about 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from our food systems. And I just like to point out, this is, I would say, a pretty conservative estimate. It ranges from 20 to 40%. And this is from everything that you're probably thinking about, land use shifts that come from deforestation, food waste like methane emissions in landfill, and also just all the wasted energy to produce that food, crop production, on-farm production, transportation, basically anything you can think of along the food supply chain. And I also like to point out that even if we completely stopped fossil fuel today, we would not reach our 1.5 degree target without influencing food systems. So it's not really an option to ignore food systems when we talk about our climate strategy. I also like to call out that we have this, of course, huge climate issue in our food system, but then at the same time, 1/3 of all of our food that we produce globally is lost at like the farm level or wasted at the plate level. And we also clearly have some huge chronic public health conditions tied to diet-related disease or nutrition or food insecurity. So food is not just a climate issue, of course, and there's clearly a lot of challenges to address and opportunities there. If we had more time, I would have loved to quiz everyone to get their thoughts on this, but this is a really interesting graph that shows what people, when we think about specifically greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 equivalent from our food system, how the public perceive what interventions would be effective in reducing emissions, and then what the data shows is actually effective. So you can see in terms of public perceptions, people are really thinking, okay, I need to buy local, buy organic, buy fresh. This is what these things that are going to reduce the climate impact of my diet the most. But by far, actually, the best thing you can do for reducing greenhouse gas emissions is increasing the amount of plant foods that you're eating and heavily cutting the amount of meat that you're eating. Of course, this is, again, I just want to emphasize, we're just talking about greenhouse gas emissions here. There's so many amazing reasons to eat local, eat organic, soil health, air quality, water quality, supporting the local economy, building a resilient supply chain. So, but if we're just thinking about carbon emissions from our food system, moving to plant-based foods is by far the most effective strategy. And also reducing food waste is kind of a close second there. And the reason that plant-based foods are just so much less carbon intensive is all of the food that is needed to grow to feed the animals that we then eat for consumption. So it's really just like metabolic waste, as well as I'm sure everyone has seen kind of like horror stories on concentrated animal feeding operations and some of the more immediate impacts there, and of course methane emissions from ruminant animals and stuff.
Just curious, why is buy local such a minimal element?
If you look at like the life cycle of a food, the transportation of that food is such a small percentage of its overall emissions versus the type of food, and by type I mean like food group. So like of course a local produce is better than like getting a banana out of season, but if banana versus like local meat or meat from around the world, like that's just so much higher in terms of greenhouse gas emissions that the shift isn't as impactful just looking at emissions. So C40's approach to working with cities and food systems is threefold: aligning public food procurement to the planetary health diet, supporting a shift away from unsustainable, unhealthy diets, and reducing food loss and waste. Just to get a show of hands, are people in the room familiar with the planetary health diet? The planetary health diet? Okay. Good thing I have a slide. So the planetary health diet is a kind of my plate figure or ideal diet that a convening of researchers, the Eat Lancet Commission, came up with. That basically they tried to understand what would the plate look like for feeding where the population is predicted to go within planetary boundaries. So looking at the land that we have now, looking at where we need our greenhouse gas emissions to cut, and also not just feeding people the projected population by 2050, but meeting their nutrition and food security needs. So what would a healthy and sustainable diet look like for where our population is going? And this plate is split, you can see like half the plate should be filled with fruits and vegetables, and then you can see on the other side of the plate it kind of breaks down the main other food groups. And again, it's not eliminating dairy and animal source protein, but they really call it out as like something that should be a flavor adder, something that is, you know, added to the plate but not the main bulk of the plate. So they recommend limiting red meat to 100 grams per week and 200 grams of poultry per week. I didn't know what grams looked like, so I brought up these two little pictures because I just couldn't really visualize that. But as you can see, it's very little. And I think something that we often talk about is like, oh, the local regenerative sources of animal proteins and meat are, of course, a lot better in a lot of ways, like water quality, soil health, local economies, etc. But in order to make that shift, we all just need to drop our consumption of meat by so much in order to be able to use that style of production when it comes to meat. And then the other cool thing about the planetary health diet is that it's really meant to be interpreted flexibly into different settings and culture, because as we know, food isn't just calories or greenhouse gas emissions, it's culture and identity, it's a way of life for so many people. So it's really meant to be interpreted contextually. And that's why C40 prioritizes it in their approach to food systems in cities. So cities in the C40 network can sign up or basically make a commitment and sign the Good Food Cities Accelerator. And one of the things they do by doing that is committing to aligning food procurement to the planetary health diet. So they're saying that if you look at the food they purchase year over year for things like school meals, hospitals, homeless shelters, anything that would be a public meal program, they want what is served to look like that plate that was the planetary health diet. And overall, again, reducing animal proteins and increasing whole plant-based foods. The second commitment is to support an overall shift in the general population to healthier, more sustainable foods, so really making whole grains, fruits, vegetables more accessible to everyone, reducing food loss and waste, like I mentioned, and also developing a joint strategy for achieving these goals, and that often means incorporating a food action plan into a climate plan at the city level. So we have 16 signatories in the C40 network who have made this commitment. New York City is one of them, and that's why we're all here today. New York City has also signed a variety of other accelerators. So just, again, with that graph I had of all the different ways C40 works with cities, they're really leading on a lot of things like buildings and energy. So they're the signatory of the Good Food Cities Accelerator. They're obviously a member of the more informal Food Systems Network. And then they're also a member of the working group that I lead at C40, which is on specifically food procurement and food waste. So I just wanted to provide a quick overview of some of the really cool things that New York City is doing in their work to pursue the Good Food Cities Accelerator. Again, stop me if y'all are going to talk about any of these, because I'm sure y'all are going to go into it in more depth. But New York City spends around $500 million a year on food for public meal programs. So that's schools, jails, hospitals, homeless shelters, pantries, things like that. And the city has made a commitment to reduce their food-related emissions by 30% by 2030. So, and the way they're doing that is cutting their the amount of red meat and other animal products served on the plate and increasing plant-based options. As part of the New York City food standards, which are the nutrition guidelines, there is a required amount of plant-based protein served each week. So I think it just got bumped up to 2 meals every week. You're looking across breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Have to have the main protein be plant-based, and they also have phased out processed meats and red meat. In terms of making healthy options more accessible. There's so many different food access programs in New York, but a few cool ones that I think are great are the health bucks, where you can shop at your Grow NYC farmers market, and for every dollar you spend on fruits and vegetables, you get a $2 coupon to also spend on fruits and vegetables. So it's basically like buy one, get two. There's also an initiative, Shop Healthy, where the city works with smaller stores, corner stores, bodegas, that sort of thing, to increase the amount and accessibility of healthy options, including fresh fruits and vegetables. And then New York City's Plant-Powered Carbon Challenge, which I'm sure Nikki will go into, which was her baby when she was at Mayor's Office of Food Policy, and it's just an amazing private sector partnership, so I'll just put a pause on that one. And then, of course, New York City does so much to reduce food loss and waste, which I will let you cover in your presentation. And then at large, the city has a food forward plan, which is their plan for a sustainable food system that aligns with Plan NYC, which is the city's climate plan. And then I also just wanted to call out that there's a cool kind of governance model that New York City does called Feed NYC, where they bring together a bunch of food access organizations and city departments that work on food access to meet regularly and make kind of a united plan to reduce hunger in the city. So that's just an overview of all of the things that C40 is doing, some of which might be informed, or New York City is doing, some of which may be informed by other cities in C40 network. Certainly they're presenting a lot to C40 to share what they've done, what's worked and what's not worked. I don't know if we have time, but I have a few other examples just from around the world that I thought was really interesting. I know we're all here for New York City, but wanted to share a few kind of success stories from the network. So Nairobi has introduced plant-based meals in their schools, and they've actually seen a really big impact on enrollment, which is great, and also job creation. Tokyo has a cool kind of food environment program that's called Vegetable Life, and they work with food businesses and supermarkets to up the amount of vegetables in menu items and restaurants, and then supermarkets are also selling vegetables in smaller quantities at cheaper prices, so it's not as hard to get. And a study that looked at the impact of this project saw vegetable consumption go up. Interestingly, much more in men than women, which I was like, maybe they just started higher, but very interesting. London has some junk food ad restrictions. There's a lot in South America too that are similar to this, but not yet, I think, in the US, but they've banned advertising of certain foods on the public transit network, and they're also banning junk food ads on TV before 9 p.m. in order to reduce children's exposure to marketing of certain foods. And it's expected to save the health service over £200 million. And again, this is just really threading that needle of climate and health. In Rio, they have this really cool closed system food and waste initiative where they collect food waste, and if it's still able to be eaten, they'll use it for consumption via food banks. And then they also have the first biomethanization unit in Latin America, and they turn the other food waste into biogas and organic compost that is then used in urban gardens and soil restoration across the city's parks. So it's really creating that closed loop economy. Thank you.
So they make us use this slide at the sanitation. Just kidding. Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Boyles. I'm the Director of Outreach in the Bureau of Public Affairs at the Department of Sanitation. I've been working at the department on a handful of different programs on outreach and education. Not just curbside composting, but curbside composting's been my passion for so many years. As Chase was saying earlier, it's the program I first started working on at the department. Before I was at the department, I was working on community composting initiatives with smaller community organizations, and also doing on-farm composting before I lived in New York City. So working on composting, very passionate about it, and now we're in this point where it's a citywide program, and I'd like to, through this presentation, kind of talk about what the program is, how it works, and hopefully that explains, a lot of people don't really know how the underlying city functions, especially from an operational agency like Department of Sanitation. starting off with curbside composting citywide, but it hasn't been like that for very long, right? We have a very specific program now that has taken many, many years to get to this point. We started out with small pilot neighborhoods years ago where we were trying to see how residents of New York would set out their source-separated organics. Seasonal leaf collection programs in the fall or in the spring, seasonal Christmas tree collections, and then even pilot neighborhoods, and then even full-on pilot community boards, or community districts, excuse me. So just if you don't know, New York City is divided into 59 community districts, or community boards, and Department of Sanitation operates in each one of those districts with the garage, and we provide collection services for trash and recycling being metal, glass, plastic, and cartons, and paper, and now with composting. Right? But before, we tried a lot of different programs to get to this place. We tried opt-in programs where individual buildings had to sign up for the service. We tried multiple frequencies or 1 or 2 days a week, depending on how much that district or that area of the city would participate. And we also tried certain different housing styles, right? Small, medium, high density districts. Which one is going to be the right for this program? Well, the thing with New York City, right, is we have to have a program that works for all of the city, right? Staten Island looks very different from Midtown, it's very different from Harlem, it's very different from the Bronx, it's very different from Queens, and I can keep going on like that. But sanitation garage and operations have to operate in a way that provides service to all New Yorkers on each week on those collection days. So the current program, all residents are able to access the program. There's no sign up or opting in any longer. We just provide the service each week on the recycling day. Every single resident of New York has a recycling day, and that's when we want to basically frame organics as also the same as recycling. Put your materials out, we will collect them. We also sort of limited the barrier to entry as far as which materials go into, which materials are required to be able to participate. And if you've noticed, or if you're following around in the news, New York City right now is really working on containerization efforts, which is this big fancy word for putting trash in bins, which is common for most of the other cities around the country and around the world, but New York City has not been doing that. And we're shifting, we're moving in this direction. It's great as a way to reduce rodents and odors, and also honestly, like a beautification technique for New York City to not always have bags and bags on the curb. So anyways, to reduce that barrier to entry, we provided brown bins, or composting bins, to many residents as we rolled this program out. You had to sign up for one and we would deliver one to you. But also we allowed for that if you just have a bin that's 55 gallons or less, we would provide it to you. You can participate using that bin, you just have to put a decal on it. And it has to have a secure lid. It's a way that we can effectively, as an outreach and an engagement technique, talk to buildings that want to say, hey, I don't have the bin, I can't participate. It's like, well, no, you can't use any bin. And sanitation operates through mandates of city council and through the mayor, through elected, through governance, right? One of the really cool parts about working on this program for the time that I have is that now we are in a mandated period of this program. It's been voluntary for the longest time. There was a mandate that passed through city council and became effective after a warning period this past April. It is still in a sort of, I don't want to say limbo period, but it is still an educational period for buildings that have between 1 and 30 units. We're still doing warnings for those buildings. But buildings that have over 30 units, we are able to write summons, which is a good way of enforcing this program. It's a really good way of getting buildings that might say that this is a hassle, that they don't need to participate, that they don't have the time, to get their attention. And it really has. It's one of the programs that we work on every week. One other thing that's popped up in the curbside compost realm is the smart bins. And smart bins, have folks seen these around the city? This wasn't something that also just showed up overnight. This was really based on years and years of working with the thinking around community composters and growing a network of individuals who set up compost drop-off locations around the city. So it's kind of proving like individuals do want to save up their scraps and will transport it from point A to point B. Not all programs in New York City have to be curbside, where the individual is only going from kitchen to curb, right? There's 400 bins around all 5 boroughs. They're accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as long as there's capacity inside the bin. We have our school trucks. Our school trucks collect the material from these, so they're able to collect every day of the week, except for Saturday and Sunday. And even with these bins, we still do operate Saturday and Sunday trucks because they're used all the time. It's a really successful program. If you're not familiar with this, go to smartcomposting.nyc, download the app. You can find the map of where they're at and use the app. And I show that slide just really because, composting, as it's mandated in New York City, you're not required to use our service, right? The mandate is to keep food waste out of the trash, commingled with trash, keeping recycling out of trash, right? Keeping trash out of recycling. How much longer can I keep doing this? Really making sure that these streams are going to where they should be going. And individuals, what I really love about my work is when people are recycling correctly and composting correctly, they say, well, what goes into the garbage? And it's kind of like, yeah, you get it. Like, this isn't some moment of being a policy wonk where you're thinking about zero waste and all that type of stuff. You're actually getting to show somebody who's really convinced of that. The curbside composting, compost drop-off sites, at-home composting, the department really supports those types of programs. There have been a lot of shifts in the networks of community composters or at-home composters, and the funding, to be very honest, right? We have a citywide program now which has lowered the barrier for entry, so some of the educational funding that was going towards community composters shifted, and luckily City Council was able to pick up some of that slack that these city agencies that formally funded. But sanitation was promoting all these different types of programs. We frame it as a very easy program. I think this is where I get a lot of pushback from people, and it's behavior change. So all of these programs and things in our life are behavior change. I do think of it as easy in the sense that food in the kitchen, separated from the trash, is the first step. Second step is separating that material and putting it in the bin, as that handsome gentleman is doing on the screen. Third step is setting the bin out at the curb for collection. Right? Sanitation, again, we have one recycling day of the week. That is how the service works. Years ago, I might have been talking about you have to sign your building up. We have to go verify your building. You have to get so many people to sign up in your community board before you have service, or service hasn't expanded yet to your area. Talk to your council member about supporting this program. None of those things are the hurdles. The hurdles are individuals getting over the ick factor, working with their building management to say, hey, why is my bin, my bin was here yesterday, why did it go away? Where did you put it at? Or convincing your roommates or your neighbors, hey, we should be not putting this inside the bin, we should be composting correctly, recycling correctly. That's the challenges that we now have with the citywide program, where it's operating as a steady state thing. One other thing about how this is easy, we like to recognize that individuals like a bag to use for capturing or holding onto their waste. So in the picture you see, it's a little kitchen container. It's lined with a compostable bag, and we also allow individuals to line with a clear plastic bag or a paper bag. On our end, on the pre-processing and decontaminating side, we separate out inorganic material from the organic material so we can still compost the material. And also we use liners on the bins, we suggest that to reduce any ick factor or odors from the bin itself. Right? Similar to how recycling is set out at the curb by building staff or by anybody who lives in a private small apartment building or multi-family building is responsible for setting up the waste. That's typically how you can see material. Composting keeps our homes and neighborhoods cleaner. Right? I was talking about containerization efforts. The city, about 70% of all waste is containerized right now. When you're considering single-family homes up to 9 units, private businesses, they all have to containerize their waste. And then we're piloting these programs such as the Upper Manhattan and Manhattan Community Board 90 Empire bins. We're also expanding that program in parts of Brooklyn in the next year. A huge effort by the administration is to keep rats out. Right? So that is one big reason why composting, I think, was pushed, not just from the sustainability side, not just from the material from landfill, getting it out of landfill and turning to compost, but also just the public health standpoint of rodents and pathogens and reducing that. Right? So obviously, I thought my next slide was on creating compost, but it's not. It's what can be composted. I was just going to say, obviously, the one of the aspects of the program that's really incredible is creating the finished material. I'll talk a little bit about that, where we make it, what we do with it. But there's kind of these two tandem reasons why sanitation, anyways, has decided to work on these programs, not just in the current administration, but over the past 20 years as we're working on how to figure out source-separated organics, how to not pay for sending this material to landfills, how to actually realize that this is actually a beneficial product. So what can be composted here from the Department of Sanitation's standpoint? We'll take it all. If it grows, it goes. Kind of this little statement that we use if it's anything from your kitchen, anything from your yard. And people sometimes look at this and they see meat, bones, and dairy, which for the community scale composting that takes place at either community gardens or with small groups, they sometimes don't accept that material. But Department of Sanitation, we've set up long-term contracts with organizations, with companies that manage the material once we collect it. And those sites that we take it to have to be able to manage meat, bones, dairy, things like that. So it's this municipal scale where we collect on the tonnage, not on the pounds. We just need to be able to take that material. We also need to be able to take material that isn't compostable, right? There's a lot of work and effort that goes into decontamination, removing plastic film, removing metal cans, removing batteries, removing any type of non-compostable material that gets into the bin. And maybe it gets into the bin accidentally. There's been this time that I overheard someone put a can of beans into the compost bin because they wanted to compost the beans. And in education, you can't really get mad at that. They're trying. You want to start from there and keep going. At sanitation, all of our transfer stations, the vendors that manage those, that we've set up contracts for, they have to have deep packaging equipment. And while you do tours here, maybe one of the tours at one of our facilities could be opened at some point. That would be really cool, I think, to see some of the deep packaging equipment. Basically, these giant screw presses that can press organic material one way and anything inorganic is going another way. And that's how we provide or create a clean feedstock material that can then go further for either digestion or for composting. Contamination, actually, just to name, it's actually really the small issue. It's really more of the participation that we really want to grow. So where does the material go? The photos here showing one of our sanitation operates 2 compost facilities. The compost facility is one that receives residential material from about half of the community boards in the city of New York. The material goes there. We have our deep packaging equipment at that facility. So we create kind of like after the source separated organics, as you can see the truck is dumping, we go through both visual decontamination and then machine-based decontamination. And then it is mixed in with the compost pile. So this would be the greens, right? It's mixed in with wood chips, and then we have aerated bays where the material breaks down over the next 8 to 9 months. That finished compost is given out to the public through community compost distribution events, we give it to schools. Landscapers do purchase the material, about 60% of the quantity that's produced, and then we give out about 40% of it. The other material does go to anaerobic digestion, not just the wastewater treatment plants in Newtown Creek, which are depicted here, but there are also other digester facilities within the region in New Jersey and Long Island that can take the material. Right? And this is actually one of the needed routes for organics right now because there's not enough processing capacity for solely for composting in the region right now, in New York City specifically. Additionally, in addition to creating the biogas, there is dewatering. Right? Most of food is water, so these facilities do dewater the material and then it is returned to the through the water treatment facility. And we do have the beneficial product of the digestate afterwards that is then composted. So I talk a lot about high-rise buildings because it's really the crux of who we work with now at this point. Residents all received public mailers. We do a lot of education and outreach in all 10 or 11, mayoral languages that are the critical languages around the city of New York. And we still have this hurdle of building managers who have, or building supers who have a lot of things to do, who find another program that the city is rolling out is taking their time. So we work with them through many different ways of educating the public, or educating these building managers with site visits, with citations, with trainings. We have a clean buildings training that we offer, where we can actually eradicate or have an amnesty for citations and summons for these building supers who do take these trainings, right? So we really do try to work with them where they're at, mostly with the warnings, which are really, really important. Like, hey, we are monitoring what you're setting out each week, but also residents rushing to their building staff and letting them know, hey, I want to be participating in this program, let me have access to it, is a really big help. Because the agency can only do so much. We need residents to be telling their building staffs, hey, I want this program, I should be participating in it citywide, I would like to do this program. All this material is available online. NYC.gov/sanitation materials. And you can also request folks from the outreach team to go to buildings and talk to the building staff or distribute some of those kitchen containers. And really just try to do technical assistance to help people through. This is a big behavioral shift for buildings, for residents, for New Yorkers, but we're here to support them. And we'll give them a ticket if they... I threw this slide in, the compost season's over, but I threw it in case people were interested. So we have 4 department facilities that we offer compost for free to the public. All of our programs are free, right? But these facilities, you have to register in advance, but you can go away with up to 10 40-pound bags of compost. If you go to, yes, it's a lot of compost. It's a lot of compost. We're giving away lots and lots of compost for free. And while it is, it's the end of September, really not using too much compost right now, but you still could. You want to make sure folks are aware, NYC.gov/get-compost. Sometimes Google messes up a PDF site, just hiding right there, but you can see it. I threw this slide in, usually thinking about who's the audience that I'm speaking to. But one of the things about educating New Yorkers is a lot of folks, especially folks in this room, I'm making an assumption here, folks in this room maybe are aware or know, but you're going to go home, you're going to talk to your friends, family, roommates, and you're trying to get this working in your house, your household, or your community somewhere. And so we really, as the program is very simple to use, as the program really has become very easy to use, it's citywide now, there are still these misconceptions. Right? And while we don't have a marketing budget to just kind of erase all these things, I'm relying on people who have sat through and listened to me speak to further the knowledge and education out there. So composting attracts rats and other pests. Well, that's why we're using a bin, the hard-sided bin, to keep those pests out. Y'all have seen bags of trash torn open by animals. Like we're doing the opposite, right? Composting is complicated. Really something I think that's based on individuals feeling like they have to know how to farm or compost, as the gentleman spoke about earlier. And we'll do the heavy lifting as far as processing the material. We just need to be source separated in the home and then set out at the curb. We certainly accept meats, bones, dairy, and cooked food, as well as plastic bags, and there's no judgment there for individuals using a plastic bag. From our standpoint, we know that it removes a barrier to entry to have that thing to take the bag to the compost bin. And most compost gets thrown out as something that people are sometimes concerned about. Sanitation has a massive fleet. Maybe there'll be a fleet forum, and talking about our electric vehicles could be something there. Also, our split body vehicles. About half of our fleet is set up for split bodies, where one side of the truck is for organics and one side is for trash. And of course, composting works in large buildings. We like to let people know, this is one I'll end on. you can report your building, you can call. We're not trying to be like this big brother type of thing, but we want this program to really work, and so if you are really passionate and you want this program to work, you're having issues with your building manager, you can call 311 to let us know, and we'll send supervisors to do educational outreach. They're not going to go there first day and write a summons or a warning, or write a warning. They'll be there to educate. Yeah, I'm going to save this one because I know we're going to have some questions.
All right, last presentation of the night. I'll try to go fast so that we can all get out of here, but I'm excited also for a discussion at the end, so save your questions. My name is Neethi Jain. I am an environmental scientist. I also say I'm a storyteller. I do a lot of work on narrative change and really thinking about how people change behavior when they listen to stories that matter to them. So that is the experience that I'm bringing into this. I spent the last couple of years working for the city at the Mayor's Office of Food Policy with Tia. I now work for a small nonprofit called Food for Climate League, where we talk about stories and how they affect our food system. So I'm getting it's called Food for Climate League, and I get to do what I love every single day. So I'm only 2 weeks into that job. So I'll ask me in 6 months how it's going. So I here am kind of wearing the hat of someone who's worked for the city for the past couple of years. So what I'm going to spend time today doing is talking to you very in depth about what New York City is doing to feed its residents. So Tia gave us a really good overview of it, and now we're going to get a little bit more granular. And all of this comes from, all of the work that New York City does comes from this idea that not all food is created equal. And specifically that our food system is a huge contributor to the climate crisis. Actually, one of the most significant contributors. When we think about what causes climate change, we of course think about our buildings, the heating and cooling. Of course, we think about transportation, like our cars and our vehicles. But we don't often think about food systems as the thing that is contributing to climate change the most. But in fact, a significant amount of greenhouse gases are produced by our food system, and 90% of those greenhouse gas emissions come from the animal-sourced foods that I'll talk a little bit more about. I'll first do something which is, if it shows up, it'll show up. Okay, so any communications expert will tell you that it's not a good idea to debunk a myth because people don't listen to the truth, they just listen to the myth, and then they keep spreading that. So I'm going to try debunking a myth, and I'm going to trust you to listen to the debunking part. Oh no, does it not work?
Is it
It's a video.
in it?
Will it play?
It's a Google slide.
Yeah, okay, it won't play. I will tell you. I will tell you. Basically, this is starting to be a visualization of this myth that is called food miles. We always think about where our food is coming from and how we can make it more sustainable in terms of food miles. We think the further it comes away, the more it contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. This is what Tia was showing too, where how far your food is transported is actually a really small percentage of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that food product. For something like beef, transportation is 1% of the overall emissions associated with that product. And that certainly depends on what method you're using to transport. There's trucks, that's a train, it's a boat, and then a airline, and you can see that airlines have the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. But this video would have shown you that actually airlines only transport a very small amount of the food that we consume in our food system. So the kind of debunked myth is that more than worrying about where your food is coming from in terms of its locality, think about what you're actually putting on your plate. There are so many reasons, as Tia said, to shop local. It absolutely supports your local economies, it helps our farmers, it creates a regional food shed, it helps you eat more seasonally, and those are all really, really important things. But when we talk about it at scale as a climate solution, actually what you put on your plate matters a whole lot more. And this is the data that kind of shows it. Let me go back into the slideshow. So this is a graph from the World Resources Institute. I'm sorry the text is so small here, but this is a map of the greenhouse gas emissions and resource intensity associated with different food products. So this one is beef over here. This is sheep and goat meat, followed by dairy, then poultry, then fish, eggs, pork, and then everything else is plant protein. So pulses like your beans, legumes, grains, fruits and vegetables, etc. And what this shows is that certain animal products have up to 20 times the resource intensity as other products. I want to say that we're not vilifying certain kinds of foods here, right? Everyone eats food to nourish their families, to fill their bellies. We're not trying to shame anyone about the foods that they eat, but we are trying to say what we eat really matters. What you put on your plate really matters when it comes to your climate or carbon footprint. And so when we think about at scale, what is New York City doing to serve its residents? We want to think about this research and this data, because imagine $500 million of food spend at the hospitals and public schools and shelters. That's a lot of food and it's a lot of money. So if we can align that with the most climate smart and climate friendly food practices, then we have a better chance of having a good carbon footprint for New York City. So New York City actually mapped, oh I'm sorry, some of the text is not showing up correctly because it moved over to Google Slides, but New York City actually mapped our carbon footprint, and you can see that buildings and transportation absolutely are huge, huge chunks of our carbon footprint in New York City, but green is food. And so food is 20% of our overall carbon footprint in New York City, and that footprint primarily comes from only 3% of what we buy in New York City is beef, and that contributes to 42% of our overall carbon footprint. We buy about 46% of animal-based foods, and that is also close to half of our carbon footprint. On the other hand, we buy plant-based foods around 37%, and that's only 6% of our overall carbon footprint. So when it comes to what we buy, if we can shift towards more of these plant proteins and other plant-based foods, then we can 100% shrink our carbon footprint. So how are we doing that? New York City made the commitment to reduce our carbon footprint by 33% by 2030, and did that in 3 primary ways. The first is in our hospital system. We often talk about having a public health crisis. The way that we can think about diet-related diseases, chronic hunger, and food insecurity is by thinking about nourishing our residents with food that's not only climate friendly, but also good for their bodies. And so in our hospital system, we introduced plant-based defaults. I'll tell you what that is in just a second. I'll kind of give you an overview of what else we did really quickly. In our public schools, we introduced new recipes and nutrition education for public school students. And then we worked with the private sector to set targets for them to also reduce their carbon footprint. So now I'm going to go into detail for each of these things. So this is really coming out of the power of procurement. Imagine that $500 million. We can vote with our dollars essentially and use $500 million to create the change that we want to see in our food system. That is where the New York City's food standards come in. So every agency that serves food, whether it's a public hospital or a school or a shelter or a correctional facility, they are required to meet certain standards for the food that they serve. And in those food standards, we require them to serve, this should be 2 plant-based meals per week per meal type. And we do culinary training with those food providers to make sure that they are producing recipes that are delicious, that are culturally relevant, that matter to the people that are eating those meals. And we use something called defaults in our food system in order to help people eat in a way that is not only more climate friendly and healthy, but also something that feels relevant to them. I can tell you, as someone who has worked for a government, no one likes to be told what to eat, and they definitely do not like to be told that by the government, right? No one wants the government to tell you what to do or what to eat. So the way we approach this process is speaking of the government, we use something called a default. So defaults are kind of everywhere. Think about when you sign up for a new job and they have like a default retirement program. How much effort does it take to go in and make changes to that retirement program and pick your new index fund and whatever it is that you're doing? It's so much easier to just leave it as the default, right? So defaults are really effective ways to get people to do the kinds of things that you think are healthier, more sustainable, better for them. So in our hospital system, we have a default meal that we call the chef's special that is a plant-based meal. So anyone who's in the hospital system, the first meal that they're offered while they're in the hospital is a plant-based meal. If they don't want that, they can choose another option. The second option is actually also a plant-based meal, really pushing that default. And then if they don't want, they can choose another plate that has animal protein in it. But this is a way for us to really showcase how food can be a part of the health and recovery of people that are in our hospital system and help fight some of those diet-related chronic diseases. So New York City Health and Hospitals have been doing that since 2022. They've served more than 1.2 million plant-based meals, and people actually stick with that plant-based meal. Over 50% of people choose to stick with the default. Before, it used to be 5%. If you gave people the option of, do you want this meal or do you want this meal? Originally, it used to be 5% of people would go for the plant-based option. Now, by calling it the chef's special, over 50% of people are picking that option.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Are you saying that every day that someone's in the hospital, they're offered those first two options?
That's right. That's right. Exactly. When they're an inpatient,
Right.
essentially. Yeah. And the results of this program are really impressive. So we certainly dropped our carbon emissions as a result of reducing the amount of meat and dairy that we're consuming. It also saved us a ton of money. So 59 cents per tray were saved once we switched over to that plant-based meal program. At scale for our hospital, that's about $500,000 a year. So think about taxpayer money, right? Like, we also want to make sure that we're being thoughtful about how our taxpayer dollars are used. And I also think this is really important because oftentimes a more plant-based diet that's richer in fruits and vegetables is often assumed to be more expensive. People think like eating more plant-based means, oh, I don't have enough money for that. Like, that's an elitist thing to do, right? But actually switching to a lot of those plant proteins like our legumes, beans, grains, other plant proteins is a lot cheaper, and we're using recipes that are very culturally relevant. Think about the diversity of cultures represented here in New York City. We have meals that match the kinds of foods that people have grown up eating, that their families have produced. And that makes them feel more comfortable when they're in the hospital system. They're feeling vulnerable, they're feeling scared. They find these very culturally familiar dishes with the flavors that they love, and they actually enjoy the food. So we've been kind of surveying how people like the food, and satisfaction rate with those plant-based meals is consistently over 90%, which I think is really, really impressive. All of this kind of defaults and how people are picking meals is part of my favorite part of food systems, which is choice architecture or behavioral science, right? When we interact with spaces, we don't realize how much is built for us to make a specific action or make a specific choice or take a specific action. Think about when you walk into the grocery store, like what you have at eye level. Companies have paid a lot of money to be at eye level. The companies that have food up top or down below where you have to look at the shelves, they're not paying as much because those are not the things that you see when you walk into the grocery store. Think about all of the things that you interact with right when you're getting to the checkout aisle, right? There's your gum and your junk food and your soda because you're feeling a little bit decision fatigue and you're ready to get out of the grocery store. All of that choice architecture helps people make decisions. So what if we utilize that choice architecture for good? That's where defaults come in. That's also where nudges come in. So has anyone read the book Nudge by any chance? Really good book that I would highly recommend. It's from a behavioral economist who talks about how we can use nudges to really help people make choices that we think as, government agencies or policymakers or decision makers that we think will be better for our cities and for our residents. So good examples of nudges that you may not even have noticed. If you walk into a Starbucks, particularly around holiday time, all of their holiday drinks are oat milk by default. You won't know that because it's not going to say this is a vegan drink. It's going to say it's your caramel, pumpkin, whatever flavors they come up with at Starbucks. They just happen to be oat milk by default. They don't cost more money. They're the same price. That's a nudge that is very powerful in getting people to pick a drink that is plant-based by default. Another thing that's very effective is putting plant-based proteins and alternative meats in the supermarket where people are most likely to go searching for those products as opposed to hiding them away in particular sections. So we use that choice architecture, again, as a way to gently encourage people what to eat rather than telling them what it is that we want them to eat. And the final way that New York City has really been kind of thinking about working on food systems is by engaging the private sector. So this is a program that I worked on while I was with the city, where we wanted to get our institutions all across the city to also take action. So think about all of the places where food is served beyond our public schools and hospitals. There's, of course, all of your restaurants and cafes. There's sports venues like Yankee Stadium and the US Open. There are universities, there are hospital systems, there are a ton of food service providers in the city that can also take action. So we created a program where these institutions take a pledge to reduce their overall carbon footprint by shifting to more plant-powered foods and reduce their emissions by 25% by 2030, which is a little bit less ambitious than what the city is doing, but also we see really a lot of interesting ways that these institutions have taken it up. So the US Open just passed, right? It was the last week of August and first week of September. They tried a blended burger where they split their beef burger 50% beef and 50% plant-based proteins like mushrooms, and people actually loved it. They tried it at the Australian Open first. People actually liked the taste of those blended burgers more than the 100% beef burger. Again, a very effective nudge. And so then they rolled it out at the US Open, and people were very delighted by that burger. And we've seen essentially that there is good results coming out of some of these programs. So before we started this, you can see that this is how much food we were purchasing in 2019. This is how much food we're purchasing. This should be updated to 2024, but there was certainly a dip during the pandemic, and then it kind of came back up post-pandemic. This is how much food we were buying. You can see that our food purchasing actually increased from 2019, but in terms of our carbon footprint, this was our carbon footprint in 2019, and even though we're buying more food, our carbon footprint has actually gone down. So this is a really good proof of concept for us to say this is working. What we put on our plate matters, and when we change what we put on our plate, we can actually see real results in our carbon footprint. So I'll close by saying we hope that this is more than just a case study. We want other cities to also take up this action, and we're starting to see it actually. Los Angeles County just implemented a plant-based default for their departments. We've seen healthcare organizations try the same default as we have in our healthcare system. And speaking to Tia's C40 coalition, like there are many cities around the world that are really working to achieve that plant-rich planetary health diet. And this, for me, is a really exciting way to think about climate action. I know a lot of you out there are working on amazing parts of the climate and sustainability industry. The thing about food is that it is so personal to us. Like we interact with food more than 3 times a day, right? It's on our plates, we can touch it, we can smell it, we can feel it, we can taste it. It is one of the ways that I think we can have maximum impact on turning everyone into a change agent for climate, right? There are a lot of people that probably do not understand renewable energy. I am one of them. There are a lot of people that don't really walk through forests that they hope to conserve one day, but food is the one thing that you can interact with every single day. And so making decisions about what you put on your plate is one of the best ways to be a climate actor. Thank you so much. What questions do you have? Please.
I guess the way it's going is there something, let's say a development near term that you already foresee happening that you're looking forward to, or a wish list item that might be excited to see happen potentially to like really take your efforts to the next level? And that's for all of you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, I work in the city, right? I'll represent the city. We're about to have a mayoral election, sanitation. Oh, pardon. Yeah, I was saying that working at a city agency, mayoral elections, right? We operate based off what the people tell us to, right? And sometimes I like to tell people, like, sanitation's creating the program that's going to be simplest for users, but we give our mandates to even create those programs from what the people tell us. So I'm encouraged by that, the possibility of there being, more sustainability that the public's asking for, more accessible programs in that regard. We're working towards containerization right now as well, and I think that that's really cool. I think whenever I travel, when I come back to New York, I'm like, there's garbage everywhere. It's not because I work at sanitation, because all I can see is garbage. but we're moving in this direction where people are seeing the benefit of containerizing their waste in a way that allows for much healthier environment.
I didn't think of an answer yet.
I was
10 seconds.
yeah, I think one thing that I think about is like we're at a very, like depending on your political opinions, like concerning or big shift in federal politics right now. And one part of it that I think I'm like holding out maybe some hope is that there is this increased attention to food and its connection to our health. And the food industry was really successful in pushing the narrative that like exercise was driving and lack thereof was driving like the chronic disease crisis. But now there's like renewed attention and research coming out like food is really driving the public health crisis. And there's this like Make America Healthy Again movement, and we don't really know the details of what that looks like, but I am hoping that this sort of like increased attention to how food can in many senses reverse dietary disease and can accomplish so much, like maybe there is some hope there. And we're seeing it in the cities that I work with that even when money or funding or attention is pulled from the climate crisis or pulled from climate causes, there's renewed attention in the health intersection. And food is one of the unique areas where like the healthy thing is the climate friendly thing, which is helpful. So I'm kind of hopeful for this increased attention of food driving health.
Yeah, really good point. I think I would say I feel really excited by this shift to more cultural diversity on our plates. Like, I think that has been something that's very cool to see people kind of branching out into cultural foods beyond the Western diet. Like I'm from India, I grew up eating pulses every single day. Like lentils and beans were a big part of my diet, and they are incredibly flavorful and so diverse. And I think when food providers tap into that diversity of plant proteins, like you can get so creative with food. Like I think there's an estimate that we only consume 5% of the overall plant life on Earth that is edible. So think about all of those grains and like all of the foods that are out there. Like if we want to talk about creativity and joy in the food system, like that's definitely a place for us to innovate and get excited. So seeing a city like New York get into more cultural recipes to be served at the hospitals or the schools, that's something that's super exciting to me. I hope that more and more food service providers are like, yeah, let's tap into some of those cultural food traditions. Yeah.
If I could just add one more thing to that, which I think like ties our areas, is like this emphasis on deliciousness and quality is so important, and is also like driving reductions in plate waste, and which has such a huge climate impact. So I feel like as we see cities move into the direction of like, okay, food needs to be delicious and culturally relevant and healthy and climate friendly, you're having kind of a circular impact on the food waste front too.
So, Niti, in your slide, and this is for all of you guys, in your slide you mentioned a little bit about choice architecture. I'm curious, in all of your fields, what would you do to kind of change the narrative to better beneficiate in your field? Good question.
It is a good question. I mean, I have many examples of choice architecture, and some of them actually have a lot to do with food waste as well. Like, I remember working with a lot of caterers that would put together like buffets, let's say for stations where you go for a conference or you're at a wedding or something like that. Even where food is placed along that buffet line has a huge impact on what people take. So if you put your healthier plant proteins up first, and then maybe that's why like dessert goes at the end, right? People fill up on the things that are healthier for their bodies, healthier for the planet, if you put those things first. If you use smaller spoons, then people take less food and waste less food as well. So literally just changing out the size of your servingware actually has a huge impact. The size of your plate has a big impact. Like, there's so many little decisions that you make when you have a food service environment that can suggest to your eaters gently to only take what they need and to take the things that ideally they can fill their bellies with and feel filled up by without wasting like meat or dairy products if you put those at the end. Yeah.
The thing I'm thinking of with that question relates to the big concept in sustainable solid waste management, which is really about the concept of how much your trash or collection of that material, I'll call it trash, costs. In New York City, you have all you can use service, $0, right, to the individual resident. That is wild, right? Like all you can use service for forever, and that's where we're at right now, right? So one of the things that sanitation has been looking at is how, for instance, for schools, they have 5 days a week of organics collection service and 1 trash day. Right? They have a residential trash collection day. Residents have 1 recycling day of the week. They could have more recycling days a week. Right? They could have 3 or 2 trash days a week. When you, as a resident on the residential side, say you get as much trash as you want and you get more days of trash versus you have to fit all of your composting, all your recycling on this one day, that's going to make it harder on the user, right? So to shift that, that's pretty big in New York City, but that would be, if I had this magic wand, then that would be something I'd look at for residents.
Yeah, and I was thinking about like the marketing of certain foods over others in terms of like nudges and pushes, because I think sometimes it's like, okay, we're talking about these interventions with the plates and the spoons or the defaults to shift you towards the good stuff, but we don't realize like how much the world around us is pushing us to make really unsustainable, unhealthy decisions. And highly recommend a book called Food Politics if people haven't read it, but the just sheer amount of money and subsidies that are poured into pushing us, and every day we see these ads for certain types of food, like that is nudging us in the opposite direction. So these policies that are preventing those negative nudges paired with, increasing the positive nudges, I feel like is really cool.
Well, I just want to say great presentations all around. It was so interesting and informative. I have one question for Andrew and then one more geared towards students. So for Andrew, I'm curious about what kind of data is currently being collected about composting in the city. Success, and also with people who are picking up compost from those sites. Like, is there any data about that?
No, certainly. So all the data from sanitation's on the district's level, and it's on what we collect and the weight, so the tonnages. We have about a 10% capture rate for curbside compost right now, pretty low. Capture rate would be like, of what can be, when looking at a waste characterization study, what is thrown out, what New Yorkers throw out in the trash, and what exists, how much of that is captured and diverted to be made into compost or clean energy. Recycling is about double that. And so we have a long way to go, but that's probably the main figure that would often be used. Now, other type of figures could be seen as access, right? So a few years ago, access was much lower, so I think that's a number I'm proud of, right? The city, all 8.5 million New Yorkers do have access to the program, and the fact that it's a year-round program as well.
That's great. And then for I'm thinking about places in New York City that have been historically marginalized. So communities who are struggling to get to grocery stores, transportation barriers, maybe there's not affordable produce at those grocery stores for those individuals. What is the city thinking about that and trying to remedy that issue?
Yeah. Yes is the short answer, 100%. And I think it's also tied to how much we recognize that chronic disease is associated with lack of access to fresh and affordable healthy food. Like we see a chronic health crisis in New York. Black Americans are 60% more likely to develop type 2 diabetes than white Americans, and that very much is a diet-related thing. So there are a number of programs that the city has started in order to help certain neighborhoods and communities access more of that food. So green markets and Grow NYC spots, certainly Shop Healthy, which is that program to get bodegas and corner stores that might be the only source of food for a lot of folks if they don't have a supermarket, for example, in their area, to have fresh, healthy produce in those corner stores or in those bodegas. Other things like health bucks or get the good stuff, like these are all ways to help positively incentivize purchasing more fresh fruits and vegetables and plant proteins, in order to kind of say, like, we understand that this is maybe not the easiest thing to do depending on the food infrastructure around you. So here's what we can do in order to create that kind of infrastructure. There's certainly more that can be done always. Like, I think a city should never rest on its laurels and always say, like, how can we get more? And how can we support particularly our most vulnerable New Yorkers more? I think there's some cool things on the horizon. Like, there's a program called Fresh where they help create new supermarket space in different neighborhoods and essentially subsidize that space so that the rent isn't as high for those retailers. And that's something run by the Economic Development Corporation of New York City. So programs like that that are kind of looking at the long game of food infrastructure, I think are really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think all of the public meal programs that we talked about, all of those are free for New Yorkers. So older adult centers and shelters and food pantries, all of the food that's there, that's kind of paid for or subsidized by the city, hopefully are putting more culturally relevant and delicious and healthy and sustainable foods in front of New Yorkers who need it most. I also think there's renewed interest in the city-owned grocery idea with the mayoral election, which I think will be interesting to play out to see what cities in the U.S. or around the world are doing. It's interesting when you mentioned Fresh. There's some shift in the research now about food deserts at large, and I feel like they had a lot of attention for a while of food deserts are driving inability to access certain foods, and then now there's been a shift to kind of get to behaviors, and the research is showing that the number of miles to the grocery store is not what is the primary factor of where people shop. So even if there is a grocery store closer, it's maybe the bodega where they know the owner, or there's culturally relevant foods there, or it's the line that they take from work to home. And we know that, especially in New York, we are not shopping at the grocery store that is the closest mileage, or maybe we are, but there's so many decisions going into that. So I think that's something kind of interesting about the behavior change and access points narrative that's shifting a bit right now.
Yeah.
Actually, I think we're just going to end it there, but if you guys... One more? Okay. Yeah. One more.
Yeah, not to get political, but the mayoral candidate, Mamdani, as you know, has proposed city-owned grocery stores. And I'm wondering if the plant-based default concept is embedded in that idea of the city-owned grocery stores. Has that been talked about at all?
Does anyone have a connection to Mr. Mamdani's campaign? Because I would love to talk to them. I don't have that connection because I'm not, well, one, I'm not with the city anymore, and two, I don't think we know who those food people are, but I think that could be a really interesting concept. Plant-based defaults tend to work better in environments where the food is already cooked and provided to you as opposed to where you're buying it. Different nudges work in the retail space versus in the prepared food service space. So what I would say is in city grocery stores, some nudges that could be really great is making produce and healthy options significantly cheaper. Potentially having the dollar go further by kind of doing the double up that we do with health bucks, where $1 gets you 2 times as much food. Placing those, produce and plant-based proteins further up in the store, closer to the checkout, things like that. Those would be the nudges that would work well in that retail environment. So, yeah, if anyone has that connection, please come see me.
And I would again advocate for the taking down the negative nudges. I worked on a project at my last job where they measured how many different places in a grocery store you encounter the sodas, and it's okay, there's not just a soda aisle, and the average consumer saw it 23 times, 23 different places in the grocery store. You're not going through the produce section 23 times, so it's put the produce center of store, soda is hidden in the back corner. Like these are things that we take for granted of like how the grocery store is set up. And I do think it's an opportunity with more city ownership of something like that. I think it would probably always be some sort of public-private partnership from looking at other cities' models, but there'd be more opportunity to do cool things like that maybe.
Okay.
Thanks, Justin.
All right. Thanks so much, guys.